Hi guys, my name is Christine and today I'm talking about the 5 ways that you can stop being afraid, right? So firstly, obviously being afraid in life-endangering circumstances is important, right? It's obviously, if you are doing something dangerous and something that is happening to you that is life-threatening, then obviously fear is a very valid emotion to have. It's a very natural response to those kinds of circumstances, those kinds of life-threatening circumstances. However, most of these circumstances that you go through day to day, hopefully, are not very life-threatening. And your fears and your anxieties are probably about more day-to-day tasks, circumstances, and life experiences. So I'm going to go from the basis of, that's the kind of fear that you're going through. And that's what's stopping. And you may be doing something like procrastination a lot because you're afraid. You really want to do something. You really would love to be doing what you are afraid of right now, but you're not doing it because you are afraid. And you're kind of in this state where you feel a bit paralyzed, because that's what fear often does. It does paralyze us. It stops us from taking action. It's the fight or flight response kind of kicks into play when you're feeling afraid. So I'm going to go through these 5 ways that you can stop being afraid. So the first one is a change of perspective or a change of attitude, basically, towards whatever it is that you are afraid of doing. So here's a few examples, right, of things that you could be possibly afraid of. And these are the things that I'm talking in context to. And again, not in context to those more dangerous life-threatening situations. So, for example, one of these things that I have in mind when I'm making this video is, starting a new job. It could be changing your career. It could be standing up to your boss. It could be going up to your boss and asking for a pay rise. It could be being more vulnerable and putting yourself out there on the internet, like making a YouTube video or writing a blog post. So people, it's open to criticism, basically. You might be afraid of that. You might be afraid of criticism, and therefore you don't want to start a YouTube channel, or you don't want to write your blog, or you don't want to write a book because you're afraid of rejection. It could be something like that. It could be you're afraid of asking someone out on a date, But obviously all these things are things that you want to do. You want to do these things, but for whatever reason, it's stopping you from, you're feeling afraid about doing it. So, having a change of perspective or having a change of attitude towards whatever it is can be really beneficial. So basically what this is doing is just looking at your situation, whatever it may be, in a different kind of way, like kind of looking at a different lens, shall we say, in a different angle. Because at this current time, the current way that you're looking at it is probably very negative, and that's why you're feeling afraid. You might be, let's say the example of you you're afraid of criticism, but you really want to start a blog, and you really want to write, but you're afraid of the criticism. So if you're afraid of the criticism and you're afraid of that, but change the way you look at it. Instead of thinking about the criticism, think about the things that could potentially happen that could work. Like, what if I don't get criticized that much? What if most of the response I get is positive? Because mostly that's what you'll find on the internet. You'll find that most, responses to whatever video you make or whatever blog post you make, whatever you put out there, is going to be positive generally, right? And it's only going to be like a small group of people that are going to find fault with it, that are going to be negative about it, that have something to criticize about it. So really, we're taking that into consideration. It's not going to be that bad, basically, right? It's not going to be that bad. And it may be the case that by doing your blog posts, whatever they may be about, perhaps you're actually going to get a lot of attention, and at some point you might be able to monetize that blog and start earning money from it. You don't know until you start doing it. And by looking at, what could happen, or the benefits of what could happen, instead of all the bad things that could happen, that can often really, really help. And maybe that you don't like the method, right? It could be the fact that you don't like which leads into my next point, which is actually changing up what you're doing. Because if you're afraid of doing something, then perhaps what you are doing, the method that you're trying to do, isn't what you should actually be doing. So, for example, perhaps when it comes to exercise, you're afraid of doing that for whatever reason. You're procrastinating on that. And it might be just that you're just doing the wrong kind of exercise. Perhaps you have been doing lots of weightlifting, but you really dislike weightlifting and you would much prefer if you went swimming and that was your kind of resistance training, you know. So it could be your method as well that could be, you know, messing things up for you here. You know, is there a way that you could do whatever you do in a more fun and enjoyable way? Because that might really help. That might really help change your whole experience about this thing that you're afraid of. So figuring out what you like to do and finding out what to do in a way that you enjoy can be really, really beneficial and can stop you from being afraid. Because if you think of it like, oh, I didn't even know I could do it in the way that I want to do it, you know, that often like makes you feel so much more relieved when you realize, you know, there's multiple different ways I could actually handle this thing. There's multiple ways I could actually do this thing, right? That could be more enjoyable. That could be more fun for me, right? So, you know, those first two, change your perspective, changing your attitude towards it is really important. This thing that you're afraid of, and also the second point, which is changing your method if whatever you do obviously requires a method or something like that. And obviously, you know, the third point that I want to get into is the famous Nike saying, and that is just do it. So if you are feeling afraid, the more you procrastinate on it, the more afraid you're actually going to become. So it's better in a lot of situations to just rip the band-aid off or rip the plaster off, whatever you call it. You know, rip that off and just get on with it, because sometimes there's not really much you can do to a situation. So this could be like, for example, the example of standing up to your boss. You know, generally you can't really change your method about doing that. You might be able to do it in a nicer way, I suppose. You could do it in a way that's a bit more less confrontational, I suppose. And you can't really change your attitude about it too much. So sometimes with things like that, you do really just need to go for it and do it. Whereas if it's something like exercise, then obviously you can change your perspective a lot more on that. It's so much more easier to change your method with those kinds of things. So obviously this all relates to context. But, you know, a lot of situations, especially those situations where there isn't really many alternatives that you can think of or do, then you do need to just take on the advice of the Nike slogan, which is just do it. Just do it. And once you've done it, you'll feel better. So, for example, I used to really hate making phone calls. And it's something I still feel a little bit uncomfortable with now. I think it's just because it's a phone and you can't really see the other person's facial expressions. And I'm a person who really loves doing that kind of thing. I love interacting with people on a face-to-face kind of basis, because it's just better for me to read their body language, so I know if they're receiving me in the right way, if they're understanding me, and it just makes there be a lot less miscommunication. But, you know, once I've made a phone call, and it's one that I need to do, so it could be like making an appointment at the hairdresser, or it could be making my dentist appointment, or it could be ringing up about a property or something. You know, I just have to do it. I just have to get through it. And once I do, I feel so much better. I feel so much more better about it, because I haven't procrastinated on it. And if I procrastinated on making those important phone calls, then I'm going to feel more anxiety about it, more fear about it, and it's just going to make me feel worse. So sometimes it's better to just go through it and just do it, because then at the end of it, you feel better about it and it's over with, and you don't have to do it again until obviously the next time you may need to do it. But generally, you know, you feel better about that kind of thing once you've actually done it. So go with the Nike slogan and just do it. So the fourth way to stop being afraid is to, sometimes you just need to give yourself a moment to regroup, especially if you're feeling really, really afraid and, you know, you got heart palpitations, you're sweating, you know, doing all those things. So sometimes you just need to just give yourself a minute, right? So just give yourself a minute if you need it, right? So this could be like when you're about to do a driving test, or it could be another kind of test, or it could be before a job interview. You know, before you go in, before you do it, just give yourself a minute to just regroup and just take in a deep breath and just give yourself a minute, right? Put on some positive music, listen to something positive, read some affirmations, give yourself a minute to visualize the outcome that you do want, because sometimes that can really help. You know, ask yourself this question. This is something I really love doing, and that is, what if it just turns out fine? You know, what if everything is going to be okay, right? How would it feel if everything turned out fine, right? And that, you know, just asking myself those questions calms me down whenever I'm feeling anxious about a certain situation, feeling afraid, especially if it's something that I just need to like do and it's something I really don't want to do, but you kind of have to do it because you're an adult, right? So that can really help as well. So just give yourself a moment to regroup, especially if it is like something that's going to happen that you need to do, that you can't really avoid, and it's something that, you know, you just have to do, right? So just give yourself a minute before you do it to relax, to just regroup, take in a deep breath, visualize, and ask yourself very quietly to yourself, what if it works out okay? What if everything turns out fine? Okay? So, right, number 5 is a realization, really, and it's everyone gets afraid at some times. So you're not weird or crazy or just you're not abnormal for feeling afraid sometimes. Okay, it's not. Everyone feels like it. Even the most successful people in the world, I guarantee it, feel anxious, feel afraid sometimes. Okay, I even think the most confident people in the world feel afraid sometimes. Okay, and if you don't feel afraid, at least sometimes when you're stretching past your comfort zone, if you don't at least feel a little bit afraid when you're doing something new, if you don't feel afraid when you are doing something that you don't like to do, or you're about to do something that you don't like to do, if you don't experience fear, then personally I think that there is actually something wrong, right? Because I think most people generally, if they're, you know, healthy, have anxieties, have fears. Obviously it's not good when those kinds of fears and anxieties stop you from doing anything. Obviously when it comes to that kind of situation, then you probably do need to seek some kind of therapist to help you with that kind of situation. But generally, you know, if you experience anxiety when you're about to do something new, when you're about to do something like a job interview or a test, or you're about to ask someone out, yeah, it's okay to feel nervous. It's okay to feel afraid, okay? You're not abnormal. You're not weird for being afraid. It's completely normal, okay? So, and I think having that realization and that awareness can really, really, really help, okay? So these were the 5 ways to stop feeling afraid and to stop being afraid. So let's just do a quick recap so we can refresh ourselves. So the first one was to have a change of attitude and perspective. So basically to see it in a different way, look at the situation with a different, more positive lens. The second one was to change your method if whatever you're doing, you know, you can do this thing in different ways. You know, find a way that is fun, that is enjoyable for you. Just because everyone else is doing it in a certain way and you hate that way, doesn't mean that you have to do it in that way. You can do it in a way that you enjoy, that you like. Number 3 is to, you know, take on board the Nike slogan, and that is sometimes you just have to do it. You just have to grit your teeth and bear it and just get on with it. Number 4, give yourself a moment to regroup, especially if you are about to enter an intense situation, a situation that you're not comfortable with. It could be like before you make an important phone call, before you have a test, before you have a job interview, before you're about to do something that you don't feel comfortable about, that you feel afraid about. You know, give yourself a moment to just give yourself a bit of a pep talk, right? And 5, understanding and having the awareness that it's okay to feel afraid. It's okay to feel anxious some of the time, okay? It's normal for you to feel that. And a lot of successful people feel afraid. A lot of brave people feel afraid. Some of the most courageous people on the planet still feel afraid sometimes, okay? So you're not weird for feeling afraid. And those are that's my best advice basically on, you know, those 5 ways that you can stop feeling afraid. Because what's important is not getting to a point where you are so afraid that you become paralyzed and you can't do anything. And I feel like sometimes that can happen a lot to people, especially if you are kind of like your own boss, if you're self-employed, if you're a business owner. You know, it's so easy to, when you have to be the one that motivates yourself, it can be quite tricky. So if you are in that kind of situation, I completely understand, because I've been there many, many times. And what I want to say to you is that you can do it. Whatever it is, you can do it. And you can do it in a way that is fun, that is enjoyable, that suits you. Okay? So I hope you've taken that on board. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall talk to you again very soon. Goodbye.